ke rumah mama ya.
Yeah, we feel that we belong.
Wah, pansusnya masih.
I hope other people have come.
Yeah, we invite them.
We'll invite, you know, but okay.
They will come around 7:30.
Oh, I didn't know what time.
No.
I thought it was like.
Come and sit and talk.
Okay, all right. You're not going to take pictures of me all night, are you?
Okay. Okay. And people just preparing food.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Good morning, Imam Ali.
Oh, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I was just searching your screen name. So it's wonderful. How's Houston?
Houston's good. The seasons are changing, so it's not as hot and humid. So that's nice. You know, fall is kind of coming, and I love fall for whatever reason. How are things in New York?
It's I think the fall is beginning now. It looks like it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Very yeah.
I heard. Yeah.
Assalamualaikum.
Oh,
Greetings of peace.
Ralph, how are you, Ralph?
Good.
Hi, Ralph.
Ralph used to be the chief commander of the peacekeeping operation at the United Nations.
Oh, amazing.
So he's general. He's Egyptian, originally from Egypt, but he's now in America.
What a task that is. Wow.
Yes. Keep the world peace or peaceful.
A lot of responsibility with that one. Whew.
Yes. And his wife is so actively involved in many interfaith and other activities at the United Nations. You know, they are husband and wife are prominent. You know, at the United Nations.
Wow, it's an honor then to be in your presence.
And if I wanted to enter the United Nations, I simply call him. I didn't need any ID. He just said to the security, "Hey, this is my guy."
That's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, Imam Ali, I was just reflecting on the last time I saw you, you know, in Queens, and that was just such a memorable weekend. I mean, I want to use the term great, but it was also, you know, kind of sorrowful in ways because of the Christ Church thing. We were dealing with that, but
exactly.
It was awesome to spend time in your home that morning. And we had, I think we had, yeah, wow, look at that. I love that picture. Yeah. Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing. Yeah. Your environment is just, it just had a warmth to it. I felt at home, which is always a blessing when you can feel home away from home.
Thank you. So thank you. Such an honor to have you in my house.
Oh, yeah, no, it was my honor. It's amazing.
How's the baby, by the way?
Oh, she's amazing.
Wow.
My God, yeah. What an experience. What a blessing. You know, everything went really well. Miriam is okay, and she's actually doing great. She's in a rhythm, and you know, I think I had the jitters that any new parent would have in terms of, oh my God, am I ever going to sleep? Am I going to do this? But, you know, thankfully, by God's blessing, Clara has been quite easy, you know, like she has Miriam's temperament, and I hope she did. She's just very kind of peaceful and easygoing, where I think I have a bit more hectic, I think, just because I'm busy and stuff. So it's just a blessing.
Yeah.
I love it. With my parents, though, Imam Ali, it's too bad because of COVID, and my parents are being very safe with traveling, and you know, thank God for FaceTime. Without FaceTime, they wouldn't be able to see her. So we're hoping in the spring.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. but
Yeah.
it all depends.
We are really praying that hope this will pass soon.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I was.
now we
Yeah.
are at 9 o'clock. So I'm going to mute everybody, and then I will ask you again to unmute yourself so that we can. Correct. Okay, please unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Okay, great. So only two of us are muted, and we have almost 100 here on Zoom, and I think people are coming more. This is being broadcasted on the ITV USA, Islamic TV, also Kalam TV in Indonesia, and then we have also your publisher Indonesia is broadcasting it, Nura book publisher, and of course on our own Facebook Live, and we have also on YouTube. So we have quite a lot of people are watching this discussion. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and good morning for those who are in the States. Good evening for those who are in Bangladesh or in Indonesia. Thank you all for joining. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to once again hosting our great friend, scholar of religion, anthropologist, Dr. Craig Considine. At this time, we are hosting him to talk about his book, but I think our discussion is going to be even larger than just a book. I've been knowing Dr. Considine since 2008 when we met for the first time, when I was an Imam at the Islamic Cultural Center, which is well known in New York City as the 96th Street Mosque. At that time, he came with his professor, Dr. Akbar Ahmad, who was the chair of Ibn Khaldun in the university. And he was also former of the Pakistani ambassador to UK. So he was a prominent person and happened to be his professor also. And so they came to interview me about Muslims in America. And I was one of the person who interviewed at that time. So since then we got connected, but then we disconnected until I think 3 years ago. You know, I constantly follow him on his social media, where he defended what he considered to be the truth and the right thing to defend. And then I invited him to come to my annual event, the Nusantara Foundation event in New York City, to be our keynote speaker 2 years ago. And it was the time when the Muslims were attacked in New Zealand. I would like to say that Dr. Considine is among one of the few scholars of religion who commit themselves to build bridges between faith traditions. I highly appreciate his fairness on his view of others' faith tradition, a person who judges the truth as the truth and not on the basis of his own personal affiliated sentiments. For this reason, Dr. Considine has been fully committed to defend what he knows about the truth of Islam and the Prophet Muhammad, particularly on his social media. If you follow him, you're going to be amazed. As a public figure, it is deeply challenging. It's not easy. He had been accused as secretly Muslim or leftist or liberal or propagandist and so on and so forth. From the Muslim side, you know, I have been also labeled as someone, you know, even last night I saw on his Facebook, someone says, you know, why you're so obsessed with the Prophet and you are still ignoring him? It looks like, you know, many Muslims want him to declare his Shahada. I think because we are Muslims are too much obsessed with this formality. You know, we fail to understand that faith is about heart and mind. It is about human character. And I'm not shy to say that Dr. Considine is a Muslim in essence, you know, because, you know, he believes in what he believes. And I think it's not exaggeration to say that he is a Muslim in essence, although according to some judgment of Muslim that formally he's not a Muslim, but he's a Muslim in essence. And the rest, Allah is the judge, ahkamul hakimin, as we say that in Arabic language. And so his latest book, I think, Humanity of Muhammad, is a testimony to that. This book is paramount important in time that our prophet is deeply misunderstood or misconceived, misperceived, sorry. Let me once again, on your behalf, on behalf of the Muslims and on behalf of Islam, we thank you, Dr. Considine, for such bravery and courage, to defend what you consider, deserve to be defended. I wanted to make this discussion as much as interactive as possible. So I'm going just to ask you a few questions, and later on I'm going to open this to our participants to comment, to ask questions. Also, I have to mention that we have some universities presidents joining us from Jakarta, from Makassar, from different cities in Indonesia. And we have prominent Muslims also. I don't know if Haidar here, who is the chairman of Mizan, Nura book, the company that published your book in Indonesia, is also joining us. And I hope that Haidar and others can comment at the end. And so I'd like to ask you a few questions before the book itself. And I'm sure that the first one is already asked many times, even by me also last time. Can you once again tell us when you begin this journey of learning Islam, and why, and how it is challenging being as a boy, if I may say, of Irish Italian descent? How did you overcome the environment that is oftentimes, is deeply ignorant of the faith?
First, Imam Ali, such a pleasure to be with you once again, my friend, but also my mentor and a role model for me. So deeply humbling as well to hear your words about me and my work, and the truth, like if people can see someone like me as just someone standing for the truth, I mean, that is truly humbling. So I thank you for that. I will say I think the disconnect that we had is partially due to me living in Europe for 7 years, because right when we had the Journey into America experience in 2008, I moved to Dublin, and I was gone, and we were on different time schedules. Yes. But we were there in spirit, Imam Ali. There's no question. And then before I dive into the personal journey too, Imam Ali, I would just like to say that those comments that you make about being Muslim, in essence, I always use this actually in my talks, because I think it really does get down to the meaning of, what does it mean to be a Muslim? And I see answers to that question in a similar regard to how I define my own identity as a Christian. So I like and I appreciate the fact that you can look at a faith category in this way. I think it's very inclusive, and I appreciate it. So my personal journey really started without me really kind of knowing. On the day of 9/11, I was 16 years old. I was a sophomore in high school at Needham High in the suburbs of Boston. Needham, to this day, is a town of about 30,000 people, about 98% of which would be of Western European descent, a lot of Irish, English, Scottish, Italian. There's also a pretty sizable Jewish community. We had Christian denominations of all sects. I think there's something like 9 or 10 different Christian churches in town. And then we also have 2 synagogues. I was born and raised in a Irish and Italian Catholic household. My mother's side of the family was particularly religious, the Italian side. My father's side, not so much. When 9/11 happened, there was absolutely no social context for someone like me to make sense of what happened, especially as a young man. In Catholic school, we never learned about other faiths. We learned about Catholicism, largely focusing on the rituals and the practices, which I look back on now and I appreciate, because I appreciate the formality of Mass. In Needham, to this day, there's really no Muslim population. The closest masjid is actually in Roxbury, where Imam Suhaib Webb used to be, and that's about 9 miles away. Mm-hmm. I also had never met a Muslim in my life. And I remember distinctly, and I make reference of this in the book, the thing that sticks out the most on that day, obviously watching on the television, back when televisions were like brought into a room on like a cart, but leaving the classroom because classes were canceled. And I just remember seeing people in the hallways shouting, you know, USA, USA, in very kind of patriotic fervor. And then later that day, I started hearing things that I won't repeat here, but somehow Arabs and Muslims got into this. You know, no one around me, myself included, knew anything about any of these categories. So my lived experience really was socialized through that. You know, your brain starts buying into the false narrative, buying into the stereotype, buying into the media coverage. So 2001, the invasion of Afghanistan happens. 2003, the invasion of Iraq happens, and I'm in college, and all of these things are happening around me. And I wanted to actually figure out why something like 9/11 happened. You know, who were these bad people? How can I prevent this from happening? So I go to American University in Washington, D.C. with the aim of being somewhere kind of in politics and diplomacy, somewhere in that kind of realm. And I was taking classes in Arabic, and I enrolled in Professor Ahmed's The World of Islam. And, you know, I'm walking into the class thinking, well, here we go. What is this Muslim professor going to say? You know, is he going to defend 9/11? Like, what's going to happen? And Professor Ahmed just starts talking about the importance of knowledge. Knowledge. So what about Al-Qaeda? You know, what about the Taliban? No, knowledge. And he provided the hadith, the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. And that one line really shook me to my core as a human. It really disrupted something in my head and my heart and my soul in a way that actually kind of irritated me, because I felt like, in a way, I had been kind of duped. I had been brought on this path that really was not the truth. And Dr. Ahmed opened up a new kind of road for me, this one of knowledge, and knowledge not merely through books, through peer-reviewed journal articles, through conferences, but really knowledge through human experience. Professor Ahmed, being an anthropologist and a notable scholar, you know, I was blessed because he brought me on this journey across the United States for a year. And we went to over 100 mosques. And I just got to see the whole entire country, not just the Muslim communities, but we were meeting with all different religious communities. And the amount of knowledge I gained, the inspiration that I gained from that, I thought then, this is something that God is calling me to do, something like this, understanding people, interacting with people. So that's my journey. In terms of how it's challenging, man, there's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of layers to it. Being a scholar is difficult in its own right, in terms of having to write and publish. But when I started all of this writing back in 2012 for Huffington Post, that's when my work started kind of getting out. And I was largely being attacked by what people would refer to as the Islamophobia industry. So I wrote an article on comparing George Washington's book called The Rules of Civility with some of the hadith related to Muhammad's life. And I was just comparing their moral character, you know, talking about things like how to treat people on a everyday basis. And this really irritated the Islamophobia industry. And for years, I was the target of a lot of different accusations, you know, being funded by some oil tycoon in the Middle East, or being, you know, funded by Saudi Arabia. But then there's also increasing backlash, actually, in the last couple of years from people who identify as Muslims. And this is kind of the same narrative. Like, they think that I'm here as like a CIA person or I'm working for like George Soros to kind of make Muslims more liberal or something. And they attack me for that. And they think I have an agenda, you know, like this is like the Freemasons are here and this is the New World Order type thing, which is, you know, bizarre. But, and I'll say this, like a thing that I find difficult, Imam Ali, truly, it actually came about after the Hagia Sophia reconversion. And I had put some comments out, and I'll explain what I put out. I just said, I was disappointed in the decision. I would have liked for it to stay a kind of secular museum. If they wanted to open it up to prayer, I thought it should have been a building in which Muslims and Christians could both share in a way that was conducive to their faith. So I thought that was pretty moderate. It's a pretty moderate approach. And I put it out on my social media, and I just was bombarded with attacks. And this is difficult because, you know, people are familiar with my work, and I think they expect certain things with my work. But like when I share a personal view, which is not even like, it's not even linked to my religion. It's not like I want Christian prayers to be said here. But like when I take my own position and it doesn't align with the positions of others, now all of a sudden I become like a sellout. Or somehow, you know, I was, the one that really got me was like, people were like, you were just bringing Muslims along this whole time. And then all of a sudden Hagia Sophia comes and I flip on them. So these are the type of things that I deal with, but it's okay.
And I think that represent two things. Number one, there is an instability in terms of emotion. In other words, people tend to be into extreme. They are very easily loving someone, but very easily also fall into hating someone because that lacking of instability in their emotions. And that's what extremism happened, basically. And secondly, of course, we are lacking of maturity in our differences, that we have to be mature on our differences. Now, thank you so very much. I just wanted to go directly to the book itself. I'm sure that this is a part of your academic, journey or work, but I cannot separate this from your effort to introduce the true face of our prophet. And as you call yourself an Islamist, how you call that?
An apologist?
Islamic apologist. I think this is something that for us Muslims, highly deserve to be appreciated. My question is, Prophet Muhammad had been, discussed, had been written by many, including, of course, by Karen Armstrong's on his book, The Prophet of Our Time. But if I may ask this question, and of course I read it, but I just wanted to ask you so that you can tell the audience, what is the uniqueness of the book that you're presenting to us? What might be different from others, books that have been written about the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him?
Thank you, Imam Ali. That's a good question. And let me first say a little note on the Islamic apologist thing, right? So I mentioned this in the book. An apologist is really someone that just defends a certain position. It's kind of simple, and it goes back to like ancient Greek philosophers. And this was a term that the Islamophobia industry actually placed me in. And I thought about it, and I actually embraced it. And I said, well, I actually have no problem being an Islamic apologist. And the reason why I say that, it's for two kind of categories. One is theological, and I see a lot of similarities between the Christian and Islamic traditions, in addition to the Jewish tradition. This conviction that I have of the similarities of the faith is actually getting stronger as I get older, because I'm reading more and I'm engaging more. So I defend things in other faiths that are also in my faith, monotheism, belief in the day of judgment, importance of compassion and mercy and justice. So I defend it for these reasons. And then there's the personal reason, because I see Muslims around the world, in my communities, in my life, my friends like you, Imam Ali, who are quite simply great people who I will defend. And your faith inspires you to live the life that you live. And I love that. And I'm willing to defend that. So the book, it's unique, I think, for two reasons. One, there aren't many sociologists in the world focusing on the sociology of Muhammad, or really even the sociology of Islam. Mm-hmm. And the book is quite short and it's simple, and each chapter is dedicated to a theme, which are largely sociological. So we have concepts like religious pluralism, civic nation building, anti-racism, women's rights. And authors like Karen Armstrong and Fred Donner and Juan Cole and Martin Ling, some heavyweights, and I've read all of their biographies, and they're much, much better than mine. But they take a largely historical approach, kind of a linear approach from beginning to end of his life. And what I like to do is focus on sociological themes, but I like to focus on stories and relationships as kind of case studies. And the book, really each chapter focuses on only 2 or 3 stories, and I elaborate on that. So it's unique in the sociological angle. And then I think, and perhaps more importantly, it's timely. So I make sure throughout the entire book to relate what was happening in the 6th and 7th century with what is happening today. So one chapter focuses on anti-racism, and certainly it's literally titled anti-racism. If you're following the news, if you're in touch with what's happening in the United States and in other countries around the world, you will know that anti-racism is actually a term that is actually becoming mainstream. It was not mainstream before these movements started hitting the streets. So the book is definitely timely as well.
Great, that's wonderful. I think one of the chapters talks about Prophet Muhammad's pluralist views on the society, and I think it's paramount important for us Muslims in particular to learn, so that we can learn how to have this pluralist view of the society, the global society where we live in. Tell us more about how do you see this as a Catholic in person, studied about the Prophet Muhammad and how he was so pluralist in his view. And not only that, he of course, we know that Islam is about mercy, being compassionate and loving to others. But Prophet Muhammad had demonstrated that and embraced each and every element of the community. Not only that they embraced them, they consider them as part of their nation, ummati in the language of Arabic language, that even the Jews and the Christians are called ummati by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And it was in the 6th century, 6th, 7th centuries, not in the 21st century we live in. So how do you see this as a formally non-Muslim? Formally.
Yeah, well, one, I appreciate Prophet Muhammad's pluralist approach to life itself. And let me say a word briefly about pluralism. I largely depend on Professor Diana Eck of the Pluralism Project at Harvard University for my kind of anchor when I look at pluralism. And she doesn't say anything in her description, which I'll explain in a second, about this idea of the belief in pluralist gods, the idea that all gods and all entities that are worshipped are equal. That's not what Eck is saying with pluralism. She actually makes pluralism a sociological development or a way of being. And she describes it essentially as the energetic engagement with religious diversity. And she distinguishes it from tolerance. And she says that tolerance is quite standoffish, that it doesn't encourage human beings to engage because you just let people be. And she says that this is not enough anymore. In societies which are hyper diverse, it's not enough. We need to engage. And she also mentions, and this is important, and it goes back to my first point about this idea of pluralist and equal views of God. Eck is saying that pluralism is not this massive kumbaya session where everyone has to agree. It's not. It's a commitment to understanding, and it's a commitment to dialogue, and it happens in action. And she uses terms like, give and take, the culture of encounter, as Pope Francis, I think, discusses and frames. And we see, again, Muhammad had his beliefs. He was a very firm monotheist, and he had disagreements with Christian communities, for example, the Christians of Najran, on the issue of Christology. And they agreed to disagree in Masjid al-Nabawi. Mm-hmm. But what's important here is Muhammad, I think, understood, and God guided him and tried to instill in him this idea that you have to get to know one another. You have to get to know one another. And we know that in 622, Muhammad embarks upon a revolutionary social project in which he is trying to create a new type of nation in which your race, your ethnicity, your tribal affiliation, or your religion is not going to determine your rank in society, because it was a confederation of peoples. And if you think, before the Constitution of Medina was kind of agreed upon, they all had to get to the table, the negotiating table. And he listened and he deliberated, and then they came up with this document that everyone agreed upon. I also think when we talk about pluralism, Imam Ali, one of my favorite stories is the first Hijra in 615, when the early Ummah was being persecuted and Muhammad feared for his people's life. And he tells them to, it's a remarkable story. Muhammad, it was so bad that he told his people that you're going to leave your homes, you're going to go to the port, and you're going to cross a ship on the Red Sea, and you're going to go to a land that you've never been to before. I mean, think about that. That's what's happening with refugees today. It's a very scary prospect, isn't it? But Muhammad knew that there were truthful and righteous people outside of his own immediate community. He had learned that King Ibn Abjar, the Negus of Abyssinia, was a good man. And he was saying to his people, go and interact, seek asylum with this man. I mean, that is a type of engagement. It's a type of pluralism, understanding that there is truth in our world, even if it's outside of our immediate bubbles. And then lastly, I'll just say, with the Christians of Najran in 630, Muhammad at the time was a rising statesman, and he was trying to communicate his ummah, share this ummah with the world, and outline its philosophies and its principles. And the Christians of Najran come to Medina, and Muhammad opens the door. So immediately you're engaging energetically. This is not mere tolerance. He says, come in. They have a discussion of Christology. They agree to disagree in a civil manner, which is fine. I think that's understandable. We can't all think the same way and agree on everything. And when it came time for the Christians to pray, Muhammad actually allowed them to stay inside the masjid to offer their prayers. I mean, that is such a bold act that it wouldn't go over well today, even, because I like the idea, as I mentioned earlier, with the Hagia Sophia, sharing places of worship. I think it's really powerful. And Imam Ali, if you remember back in 2015, I think it was, the Washington National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., allowed Muslims to pray inside a very revered site within Christianity in this country. And there was such an outroar of that. And it's just remarkable to think that in 630, the year 630, this was happening between Muslims and Christians. It's remarkable.
Stories that many Muslims don't know or lazy to learn, to read about, but it's in your book. It's all here mentioned in the books, the humanity of Muhammad. In other words, the pluralism, basically, it's more into a ta'aruf in the language of the Quran. O mankind, we created you from a male and a female, and you made you into many nations and tribes so that you get to know one another. And that's what ta'aruf is about, acknowledging the existence of others, but not only acknowledgement, it's about embracing them, but also appreciating. And therefore, the Quran itself says, "Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum," that the most respected among in the sight of God are the most righteous ones. And remember that the beginning of this ayah talk about humanity. So it's not particularly about the Muslims. In other words, righteousness can be found in any community. And that's what the appreciation of Islam is. And so I think, thank you so much. I mean, you just open our eyes onto it. And I encourage really the Muslim to read about all these stories mentioned by Dr. Considine about the Najran delegations, about the covenant of the Mount Sinai and others. There are many things that we miss. We don't really, unfortunately, we are lacking in reading the history. The other issue that you mentioned briefly about the Medina Charter and how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, established a very inclusive society in Medina that embraced every single element of the community. And you mentioned in your book that there is a parallel between what Prophet Muhammad established in Medina and modern nation states that people are trying to, establish, including here the United States. The founding fathers of the United States basically are very much close into what the Prophet Muhammad viewed about nation state. And so I'm sure you know that Fiqh Council of North America and many other religious affiliated organizations in America had considered that the goals of Sharia, the purpose of religious practices are in line with the US constitutions. But my question today is for you. These days we see that conservatism is often connected with religious beliefs. We see that. I know people are feeling more religious, but the more religious they are, the more exclusive they are. And now we are talking about the appointment of Supreme Justice, to the court. And so the more religious people are, the more they are exclusive. And why Prophet Muhammad can combine between conservatism, because he was a prophet, he was a religious person, but at the same time, he opened himself and become so deeply inclusive. What do you think? What do you think about this? Why is it different now?
Well, first, I'd like to say, I think, one of the many strengths of Muhammad's character and conduct was his balance. His balance, like this idea that you can hold these moral convictions and you can have this belief and you can live a certain way every day, meeting your requirements and doing your rituals and drawing red lines on potential moral issues. But, at the same time, we can integrate into society, like you don't have to compromise your faith in getting out there and interacting with other people, with being productive members and constructive members of your societies, of befriending people outside of your religious traditions. Muhammad was comfortable in many worlds and in many environments, and he was well balanced in this way. Now, with the idea that, the more religious, the more exclusive, Imam Ali, that is a tough one. I will say that I think it's interesting to look at social media and the influence that social media has had, if at all, on the exclusive understandings of religion that we have. And I think because social media is just a bombardment of information, a bombardment of truth claims, I think it's almost become like a marketplace. It's almost like a huge competition. And I think when people are seeing more and more products and narratives, they are kind of going more inwards. They're kind of looking for something to be more comfortable with. I don't want to buy all these things. Like, forget all of these tweets I'm seeing about all these other religious traditions. I have mine and I'm good with that. That potentially could be one way of kind of approaching this issue of the more religious we're seeing being more exclusive. It's interesting. Can I say something about the founding fathers too?
Yes.
Do you mind, Imam Ali? So this was one of the main things that really sparked my interest in Islamic studies and Prophet Muhammad's life and legacy. My understanding of the United States is quite conservative, and it's found in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. That's it. The Constitution provides freedom of speech, provides freedom of religion, the right to assembly, and so on and so forth. The Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All human beings are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's nothing in there that kind of creates a superiority complex or a hierarchy of power. What makes someone an American is not your race, your ethnicity, your religious background. What makes you an American are the rights that you have. And these rights are outlined in a political document. We call this a civic nation. A civic nation is one in which your sense of belonging is not predicated on how you were brought into this world, or the color of your skin, or the texture of your hair, or what country you're from. What makes you an American are these rights, and that's what we share. And together, collectively, ideally, we're supposed to create an open, inclusive society. This was what the founding fathers, at least in writing, had envisioned. You know, Denise Spellberg, the scholar at the University of Texas in Austin, says that the founding fathers, for all their faults, they imagined Muslims as future citizens because they knew quite well, because of what happened in Europe between Protestants and Catholics and among Protestants, that religion can be a very dicey and divisive issue, that religious communities can start persecuting one another if one religious community gets in power. And the founding fathers in the colonies, you had all these Protestant sects and they were fighting each other. Most of them hated Catholics. I would be in rough shape in a revolutionary America. But they created something new to transcend this. It's a civic nation. And we distinguish this from the ethnic nation, which is based in ancestry, blood, language, heritage, you know, ethnic heritage. And Muhammad, when I read his life, well, I continue to read about his life, but early when I was engaging with the Constitution of Medina, I was shocked that you have a political document created in 622 that really holds similar pillars in terms of envisioning what a state looks like and what kind of society comes out of a state. And we know in the Constitution of Medina that there was freedom of religion, there was freedom of worship, but I think more importantly, there was a feeling of codependency. And the document is actually quite clear on this, that if something happened to the Kanuka tribe or the Oz tribe in Medina, the Muslims would have to be connected to that. So what hurts one member of society hurts all. And society is a big tent, all the races, all the ethnicities, all the cultures. And that's what we should be in this country, at least ideally. And then let me also add too, the Treaty of Tripoli, way back in the 1790s, was the first time a foreign nation recognized the independence of the United States. And the Tripoli states up in Northwest Africa, you know, modern day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, they actually entered into an agreement with the United States. This is in the late 1790s. There was two documents, the Treaty of Tripoli. And in that document, both George Washington, the first president, and John Adams both said in the text of this diplomatic exchange and agreement that the United States is not founded as a Christian nation and that it has no enmity towards Muslims. And I think it's important here, when they say it's not a Christian nation, it's like the government is not a Christian government. You know, it's made up of Christians and that's okay, but we're not creating a religious government, if you know what I mean. And Muhammad arguably had a secular government in Medina.
Exactly. And I think this is quite similar to Indonesia. Indonesia is, as you may know, the largest Muslim country, but it's not an Islamic state nation. looking into that understanding of pluralistic society. Making America great, making America kind, and this is my favorite.
Love it. I love it. Need more of those.
Yeah, but how do you see the racial issue will play in this coming? Sorry to a little bit getting out from the topic. You see the racial issues playing in this coming election in the United States, briefly.
I think, unfortunately, the end is not in sight. It's not near. I don't think there's enough public figures trying to really diffuse the situation. I think you have leaders across the spectrum, whether it's politics or not, really kind of putting their stake in the ground and not budging. And I don't think there's not enough dialogue between the competing sides. It's very, very divisive. And I really don't see a vision, like one thing that I loved about Martin Luther King when I was a kid, and even to this day, I still admire the man deeply, was he was someone that was willing to do the hard work. He was a great leader for many reasons, but it seemed like he had a vision, he had a plan, and I don't see our leaders having enough of that. What's happening here? What are the solutions? And it's much more than having the proper court ruling for instance, in Louisville. That stuff's important, but we need big fundamental picture change in this country. Like fundamentally how we look at our neighbors, how we imagine our nation. Pope Francis calls it we need a radical change. We need to start talking more about love and compassion, but unfortunately we just don't see any of that.
So I think we need mental revolution. Possibly, yes. Yeah. Indonesian people call it revolution mental revolution. But also we need leadership. Yeah. I think we need leadership who can lead us into that process. Thank you so much. I have many questions here, but I think I'm going to give a chance to our participant to ask questions. So I'd like to begin with Daniel Hummel.
Daniel.
Oh, Daniel. Oh, okay. Do you know him? Mr. Daniel Hummel, please.
Hey, Craig, how you doing?
I'm good, Daniel.
Long time no speak, huh?
Yeah, it's been a couple years. Yeah, I recognized your name.
Yeah,
you're an author of several books.
Correct, and we've published in the same publisher, Blue Dome. So.
Oh, right, excellent. Nice to reconnect.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to do your thing in Australia, but I just couldn't roll out of bed for that.
Yeah, 4 a.m.
Mr. Hummel is from Australia?
No,
I did a talk Friday.
Okay.
And it started at 4 a.m. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
So I have a quick question, Craig, about a lot of the points that you were pointing out, and about Islam and being an inherently tolerant religion, right? Even from its foundations. And I wonder if that's one of your takeaways, is that Islam, through the Quran, through its lived experiences, through the life of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, is an inherently tolerant religion, and that throughout its history, even beyond Medina, has been lived as a tolerant religion, versus other perspectives on Islam, like you probably are familiar with Robert Spencer's stuff. Islam in the world's most is the world's most intolerant religion, and you hear this time and time again that Islam is kind of classified as this very intolerant faith, and you hear it all the time. And by the way, I'm coming at this as a Muslim. So I've been Muslim for almost 20 years, but not originally Muslim. But and so I was wondering if you could maybe get down to those kind of fundamentals as Islam as a tolerant religion, and then of course talking about what you were talking about, how Islam is maybe more than just tolerant, and how like some of these sociological discussions are moving beyond tolerance, that it's not just a tolerant religion, but it's an inclusive religion, that the idea of umat, or ummah, like in the Constitution of Medina, wasn't just something that was for Muslims, that it was inclusive of all faith communities in Medina. So I wonder if you might want to touch on that a little bit.
Definitely.
Thanks, Craig.
First, let me say, Daniel, I'm thinking now about your book, and I actually read it maybe 4 months ago, and it's called Jesus and Muhammad. And what's the second part of it? Oh, he may not be there anymore. Anyways, for those listening, Daniel has written an excellent book about the similarities between Jesus and Muhammad, and he uses scripture to make points. It's an excellent book. I would agree with Daniel here, Dr. Hamill, on Islam being inherently inclusive. And there are a few things that come to my mind immediately. The inclusivity is especially prominent when we consider the Abrahamic tradition. And when we look at al-Kitab, people of the book, elevating specific communities to a special place, not making them better than other people, but this is Islam's recognition that Muslims are part of a continuity that is linked back to Abraham, some would say to Adam. So in this sense, it's inherently inclusive, that term, people of the book, which is the title of my next book. Also, one of the first things that Professor Ahmed taught me back in my college days, how often the words mercy and compassion are used in the Quran, mercy and compassion. And it doesn't make any distinguishing elements to who that mercy and compassion is extended to. It doesn't just say, God is merciful, but only to certain people. God is merciful and compassionate as our Creator is. And I think that is inclusive in its own right. Us being part of God's creation, God expects us to take care of his creation through mercy and compassion. History, however, is much different. When I reflect back on the history of my own kind of religious Christian tradition, we see all sorts of horrors, which fundamentally contradict Jesus's vision of society, at least as it's related through scripture. We know that Jesus cared most, and I'm sure most Muslims would agree with this. Jesus cared about bringing peripheral members of communities to the center, to get them involved, to make them feel like they're wanted, to provide them with essential services. Now, when we think of Muhammad's life, it's actually not too different. When we look at his relationship with Bilal ibn Rabah, the Abyssinian slave who Muhammad freed with Abu Bakr, and then Bilal is raised to a prominent position of muezzin in the early Ummah. We have Muhammad talking about orphans, the importance of orphans. He's talking about the importance of women who should not merely be treated as these kind of objects. So he's inclusive in this way too. It's not merely between religions, it's also amongst and within societies, within communities. So, finally, Dr. Hamill, when you talk about the word ummah, and I have been researching this all summer, when we think about the word ummah, I think it really transcends the words Muslim and Islam to me, because of what we see happening in Medina with the Constitution in 622. This idea that the Ummah has a flexible boundary in a way, and that maybe perhaps it doesn't come with any kind of, doctrinal requirements that you have to believe this about God, or if you don't belong. And then I also love the term believer, which I believe, Imam Ali, you will know this more than me as a expert on the Quran. The word believer is actually used more than the term Muslim in the Quran. And I think this is really a critical kind of way of looking at big picture, not only Islam, but humanity. You know, what does it mean to be a believer? And Imam Ali, you mentioned earlier, like you consider me a Muslim, and it's amazing because I can ask you, well, what does it mean to be a Muslim? And you can give me your answer. And if I agree with it, I'll be like, yeah, if that's what it takes, sure, no problem. So it's a flexible, it's a flexible ummah, and it's an inclusive ummah that really is rooted in what we see in the Quran and the life and legacy of Muhammad.
Right, exactly. Okay, thank you so very much. Now we have the Vice President of National Islamic University in Indonesia, Professor Andi Bakti.
Okay, thank you very much, Imam Ali, and very interesting conversation tonight. I've been waiting for these talks since yesterday, and then I made a mistake. I thought it was yesterday, so I wrote to Imam Ali that why there is no link in this link address that you sent us, and then you told me that actually tomorrow, which is today, Sunday night in Jakarta. Okay, two things that I would like to raise here. Actually, there are so many things that I would like, but I think for the limitation of time, so I cannot, of course, take all this time for me. And number one is the issue of belief that you just mentioned earlier, that in Islam, actually, we have the so-called pillars or principle of belief, that we believe in God, we believe in angels. We have 10 angels that we consider as coordinators of angels. Yeah, I don't know. Of course, in this Christianity, you also have this Raphael, this Michael, Gabriel, angel of death, and also the angel of paradise and fire, hellfire, yeah, etc., etc. And the third one, we also believe in prophets and messengers of God. We actually believe 240,313 messengers and prophets. Yeah, it is mentioned in the hadith narrated by Tirmizi. There are 313 as messengers alone or prophets, and there are 140,000 is just prophets. Yeah. Okay. So it is. They are mentioned in the Quran only 25, and then also believe in Torah and maybe Psalm and the Bible also mentioned. And of course, we also believe that actually Muhammad also mentioned in those scriptures. And also we believe in hereafter. Yeah, this is very important. And the last one, we believe in predestination. But this last one is debated in Islamic theology. So probably in this perspective, and Imam Ali would say that you are actually a Muslim in this case, because we believe in the prophets. The Quran mentioned prophet Jesus Christ, I think 20 times, and then Moses even 28 times, and Muhammad as a name is only 5 times. Yeah, although there are so many pronouns there that directly talk to Muhammad. For example, when he say ka, you, for example, that means mention to Muhammad. Okay, the last one, the second thing that I would like to raise, this is also very striking for many people, I believe, in the Muslim world. If you say that Medina is actually a secular state, I, of course, agree with this 100%, but probably we have to translate, or we have to explain that the secularity of Medina is actually part of religiosity of Islam. I mean that the state is part of Islamic values, is part of the belief that we have to share, that if you are building or creating a state, you have to do it in an Islamic religious way, which is the example of Prophet Muhammad at Medina. Okay, these are the only thing that I would like to raise for you. And then actually, a few months ago, I really wanted you to be involved in our discussion in the month of Ramadan, and then I could not reach you. And then Imam Ali told me that you have to write to him by email. And then, okay, next time we would like to invite you to give a talk in our webinar one day. So we're going to talk to our colleagues here in Jakarta, and we are really expecting you to be one of the great speakers in the future. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum.
Salam. Thank you, Prof. Not only that you invite him to your next webinar, we plan to go to Indonesia.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome after Corona, of course.
Yes,
after
yes.
Corona, hopefully next year. Thank you so very much. I think when you talk about secularity or secularism itself, it's not a one monolith understanding.
Yes.
When you talk about secularism in the United States and Western Europe, for example, it's quite different. In the United States, secularism doesn't mean that you have to, completely separate religious life from state itself. In fact, state must provide chance for the people to express their religions. And that's why in New York City, we have the NYPD women police officers. They have her hijab, and then, she is also a police at the same time. There's no problem.
Yeah.
All right, please do respond, Dr.
Yes, and that's Professor Bhakti, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Professor Bhakti, peace be with you as well. Thank you so much for your thoughtful comments and for the invitation. I would love to participate in something like that. It'd be an honor. So yeah, the pillars of belief, belief in God, monotheism, absolutely. Belief in angels, yes, absolutely. Always been a part of my upbringing. My middle name is Michael. My father's middle name is Michael. My grandfather's first name is Michael, and then on down the Irish line. Yeah. God willing, if I ever have a son, his name will be Michael. Belief in prophets, absolutely. You have to as a Christian. And part of the work that I try to do is to make Muhammad as a prophet more familiar to Christians. I'm not trying to tell people who are Christian that they have to believe in Muhammad. I've never said that, even though the Islamophobia industry says that I have. I'm just trying to introduce them. Belief in scripture, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that inspired me to learn more about the Quran, was the not only the beauty of it, but also the linkages that it had to previous revelation, previous books. Belief in the hereafter, the day of judgment. I'm a believer in that, and predestination. So yes, I mean, 100% lining up right there. If that's what it means, then we're certainly in line. And I'd like to say too, in terms of the issue of secularity, just kind of three things that pop into my mind. This idea that like Islam is not compatible or incompatible with secularism, I just don't think is an accurate statement. Like you often hear these terms being used, like a secular government versus a non-secular government, like this idea that if you happen to be a Muslim majority nation, you somehow can't have freedom of religion because that is somehow not in the sources in terms of what Muhammad was envisioning, which is just inaccurate. And I've also heard a lot of people in the United States have actually said that, and they happen to be Muslim, they've actually said that the United States government is one of the best kind of forms of government in following Islamic principles, which is a very, very interesting statement because it makes us think more critically about, what are Islamic principles when it comes to governance. Yeah. And again, we've talked about this so much, the similarities between the two constitutions of Medina and the US Constitution. And I will say for viewers who I think will find this quite interesting, and Professor Bhakti, you may know of this, in the Supreme Court chamber in Washington, D.C., in the, I believe it's positioned near where the media hang out, which is interesting for symbolic reasons. But back in 1932, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt the wartime World War II president in the United States. He commissioned a German architect to instill a marble frieze, a monument in the US Supreme Court chamber. And Roosevelt tasked this German architect with signifying the greatest lawgivers in US history, in history, human history. So we had some like Confucius, Napoleon, Hammurabi, John Locke, I think, is in there, and it goes on down the line. And one of the individuals who is represented there is Muhammad. So that is symbolic. Now, there's a controversy because they actually show a depiction of Muhammad, which I know a lot of Muslims would take offense to in some ways. But that is the ultimate honor, I think, of the civic nation of this country, actually paying deep respect to the Sharia, essentially, and the Quran, because that's where these Islamic principles are derived from in designing a so-called Muslim state.
All right, we go to Pak Irman. Sofian.
Good morning. Good morning, Professor Craig.
Good morning.
Yeah, I think we have a problem this day. We have democracy crisis in the world today. I think everybody knows the use of Constitution of Medina to solve this problem because it's just universal value. There is no agenda for Islamization. So what do you think?
Let me clarify real quick because you were cutting out. I heard the first thing was democratic crisis, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then you mentioned the Constitution of Medina.
Yes.
Okay.
And use that
and how it can be used. So yeah, I think it's what's important to remember here, and I agree with you. I do think that there's a democratic crisis, and I think when you think about how the Constitution of Medina was agreed to, right? And we can imagine the believers, the pagan tribes, and the Jewish tribes all coming together, trying to figure out how to best go about ordering society. And this vision only came out of real dialogue and the encounter of commitments and an understanding that what hurts one group in society is going to impact the rest of society, that our social relations are not disconnected from one another, you know. And I believe there may be a passage in the Quran that talks about like what hurts one part of the ummah hurts all, or it might be a hadith. And yeah, and I think that spirit is coming out of the Constitution. It's like we're all different, we're diverse. We may be of different races and ethnicities and religious beliefs, but we've agreed to be part of this unit, this national unit. And the only way to move forward is through encountering one another, exchange, dialogue. And I'm talking real dialogue, not this kind of superficial kind of dialogue. Things get heated oftentimes, but you grapple with it. And you try to find a way of coming out of it with the public good in mind. And I think we are suffering today from a democratic deficit where we don't see, we see too many people in groups putting their stake in the ground with their tribe. And whatever their tribe is, it could be a political tribe, a religious tribe, a racial tribe. But people are very defensive. And I think a lot of the reason why this is happening is because we're not mixing with one another. We're not truly getting to understand one another. You know, I think unfortunately too, and I'll end on this, social media, for all of its amazing benefits, also fuels this tribalism, you know, because a lot of people can learn about the world on social media and a lot of people can communicate to the world via social media, but you're not really bringing people together in real time. And it's really important to get people to the table, the negotiating table, to figure things out.
Thank you very much. I'm going to to ask Professor Rahim Razak from UIN Makassar, if you want to ask questions or you want to comment. You can ask in Indonesian. Try to be an interpreter here. Or anybody else? Okay. Professor Fazul Iman, President of UIN Banteng. If you are in, Fazul, please. Any comment? Yes.
Okay, terima kasih. Thank you, Ustaz Shamsi, who has given us opportunity to comment in this discussion. And I'm sorry that we cannot comment very much because I haven't read yet your book, As Rights, the Humanity of Muhammad. But I respect you that this writing maybe will give valuable information, especially not only in Indonesia, but also in all the world, especially in the West. So the West view, I think now is ignorant that Islam not religion compulsion and not radical religion and not violence. But I want to ask you that why the negative view of the West until here still that Islam is a radical religion, especially in this time, many people who fear Islam, namely is Islamophobia. Islamophobia is logical fear, the specific thing or the situation. So how you see this situation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Iman, so much for that really important question. And I have 4 points. Why the negative views of Muslims in the West? I'm going to speak from the US context, but I think a lot of what I'm about to say is probably relevant to the European context, Australia, Canada, and so on. There's 4 reasons. I think it starts at the top with our leadership or our leaders who happen to be politicians, but they also come in the form of religious leaders, heads of institutions and organizations. And we continue to see individuals in leadership positions spew misinformation and sometimes downright hatred of Muslims. And this is a continuing kind of theme in the last 20 years where, for whatever reason, you have these leaders and like bashing Islam is like one of their things that they do. And like, that's what they're known for. And unfortunately, when you have these individuals with huge platforms and forums, what happens, right? How does their information get out? It gets out through the media. The media is continuously fumbling on the issue of proper representation of Muslims and Islam. And this is not only in the mainstream, it's not merely Fox News, it's also CNN, it's also MSNBC. There was a recent controversy in this country in which one leader of a program said some pretty offensive things about Muslims, and this person is like a Democrat. She's like a liberal. So Islamophobia is coming from multiple angles. The problem with media coverage on Islam and Muslims is that they only make it to the news coverage if the coverage shows violence. If it bleeds, it leads. That's the philosophy of the media when it comes to Muslims and Islam. And this is very unfortunate, obviously, because the third point is that a lot of Americans don't know a Muslim. They've never had an interaction with a Muslim. They have never been taught about Islam. They've never been to a mosque. So people are learning about these two massive categories, Islam and Muslims, an entire world tradition, and then a quarter of the world's population. They're learning it through the prism of the media. And the media is biased in many ways. So it's going to be a real challenge in the years ahead for Muslims to get into the media, to change their narrative and to take ownership of their narrative. And then finally, you know, this lack of interaction between Muslims and non-Muslims is very unfortunate. You know, this idea that you have an unfavorable view of something that you've never interacted with, that you've never encountered. You know, it's quite silly. It's like hating a food you've never tasted. There's also a deep lack of knowledge. The lack of knowledge is a result of the lack of interaction, but we need to teach Islamic history when we also teach Western history to our youth, you know, in high school and even before, and in college. When we think about Western civilization has never existed in the last 1,000 years at least without the presence of Muslims and Islam. You know, this fusion of civilizations happened throughout history. In Al-Andalus, it happened in Sicily, the fusion of cultures. And not enough young Americans know about these moments in history where Muslims and Christians lived side by side. So they need deeper knowledge of our histories as well.
So I can say that number one is politics. And I mean politics here is politicization of the issue for political interest. I'm not talking about the relations between politics and religion, because you can discuss that in the academics level. What is the relation between faith or religion and politics, as people are discussing here in America as well. But using religion for political interest, that's what the problem is. Number two is the media. When you talk about media, it's not only about CNN, Fox, we're talking about also movies, even cartoon, you know, oftentimes it's so much Islamophobic in nature. And then we talk about ignorance. And of course, we had to blame ourselves as Muslims. And so I'm going to add another one, that is on behalf of the Muslims, we fail in many ways to represent the true face of Islam, the teaching of Islam. We talk about Islam being a peaceful teaching, but we are the most, you know, people who are lacking peace. Patience sometimes. And we
Let me add Imam Ali too, like
yes,
to extend this important point. A lot of Christians have also failed to show the right side of Jesus, you know. So I'm glad you brought this point up, because we also have to remember that we can change the narrative too. We can change the discourse. You know, you can't just wait for the world to kind of bend to you. You know, like you can change it yourself, and it's important to empower people, to remind them of that.
I see. Professor Sofyan, who is the president of Muhammadiyah University in Padang, Sumatra, please. What is your screen name so I can? Okay, please do ask your question, but directly to Dr. Craig.
Okay, Assalamualaikum for all, and especially for Dr. Greg Considine. Good evening.
Good evening.
I had anyway 2 questions. First, how do you get some sense of Medina age on pluralism compared with 57 of Islamic countries IOC recently? And secondly, any of Muhammad's humanity models apply to some modern countries of Muslim that you see? Thank you.
Thank you. Just writing these questions down. So comparing the Medina pluralism to the situation in the world, I think some Muslim majority countries or states are doing better than others, I think, in terms of following this vision. And I actually talk about this in the book, and I actually refer to the Constitution of Indonesia as one that is in terms of its political philosophy and in terms of the rights, the civic rights that it gives to its citizens, is actually quite close to Medina in terms of freedom of worship. You know, the idea that you can be an autonomous religious community. You can have your church or your synagogue or your mosque. You can have church leaders or rabbis serving in positions of power, and that's okay. And you have that fundamental right. Then the opposite side of that is a country like Saudi Arabia. And when I criticize these countries, I'm criticizing their constitutions. I'm not criticizing the Saudi people. I want to be clear about that. But if you look at the Saudi constitution, it's literally in many ways like the exact opposite of what we saw in Medina, really, in terms of an overt discrimination almost. It's literally the opposite. It's actually saying, well, no, like this is a state belonging to one religion. Everything will be dictated according to this one religion, this one political philosophy, and that's it. You know, if you don't fall into that category, you're in trouble. So those are two kind of interesting examples on the spectrum, you know, and I'm sure that there are other examples along the spectrum, because there's 57 countries, as you mentioned. And the second question was, Muhammad, it was something with the modern context. Can you just briefly explain that again?
Yes, the Muhammad humanity.
Yes.
According to my,
tadi diminta.
Pak Fazul masih ngomong. Okay. Yeah, nanti. Go ahead, Pak Sofyan.
Yeah, according to my perspective, the humanity means is how to serve the human being, like in our organization in Muhammadiyah right now in Indonesia. We come to the fourth pillar of our program. The first is we call Amar Ma'ruf Nahi Munkar according to the Tabligh. Secondly, in what we call education. Third is the economic for Ummah, to generate economic and social activities. And the fourth, right now, we do the humanity, like when we got some problem, let's say natural disasters, for instance, and we serve how the flooding and then earthquake, and we come to the people who got a problem with these natural disasters, and that is my perspective to serve the humanity. But more than that, it is very large meaning for humanity, right? So how do you think? How do your perspective to observe some Islamic world right now to apply, and then maybe you got some idea with the Muhammad age in Medina.
Oh, okay.
So get some brief on that.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the question is, how should we apply Prophet Muhammad's human, thing into our modern time?
Yes, I got it. Okay, excellent. Yeah, so first and foremost, Medina in 622, the creation of the Constitution of Medina creates the civic nation. And all of us need to do as much as possible wherever we are living in the world to act on behalf of the coming of the civic nation. I think a civic nation is one of the most ideal types of governance, because our world, due to globalization, is really increasingly interconnected, where people from different faith backgrounds are living in the same space. And it's not going to be possible going forward to create exclusive states that deliberately and overtly discriminate against certain people because of racial features, because of religious beliefs. In 632, Muhammad delivers his farewell sermon, which I think captures the essence of that ummah that he was trying to create in 622. And we know that Muhammad, and I'm paraphrasing, an Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, a white has no superiority over a non-white, and a black has no superiority over a non-black, except in piety and good action. And I think this very kind of broad statement here must apply deep within us, in our hearts and in our souls, to recognize the fundamental equality of all human beings. So this isn't necessarily, I'm not asking a government necessarily to adopt this racial equality approach, though I would like all governments to do that. But I think it happens within us first, us humans, community members. Another way that we can apply Muhammad's humanity, both in Medina and elsewhere in his life, it actually comes through with the covenant that he had entered with the monks of Mount Sinai. Now, obviously, this isn't the time and place to get into authenticity, but most of the scholarship that's coming out now, it's actually pointing increasingly to being authentic. And in the covenant, and this is also mentioned in the other covenants, Christians have the freedom to worship. And these covenants explicitly mention that Muslims are not to harm churches. But even if churches are to go into disrepair, it's an obligation upon Muslims as their neighbors and as their community members to help rebuild these churches. Now, when we look in recent years at the number of attacks on churches in various parts of the world, there hasn't been thousands and thousands, but there have been a lot. How can anyone justify that? How can anyone say that this is an action that represents the vision of Muhammad? It just simply can't. So I think that is another important, relevant concept to remember. And then finally, I dedicate a chapter in the book to women's rights. It's one of the last chapters.
Sure.
And I really just focus largely on two stories: the relationship that he had with Khadija and the relationship he had with Aisha. Khadija, 15 years his older, probably more well off in terms of her material goods and her resources and her status as a member of society. And if you think about, Muhammad being in the position that he was in, he was almost taking a leap, marrying this woman who was arguably of a higher class than he was. I mean, think about the type of man in the modern context who would do that, kind of being so humble and entering into a relationship for the right reasons, for principled reasons. And then, of course, Aisha was empowered, and she went on to do great things as a scholar, as a representative of this Muhammad's vision of a ummah. The common theme we see in both of these cases is empowerment. It's empowering women, allowing them to be who they were destined to be. And we see women serving in a lot of leadership positions who happen to be Muslim in this country and around the world. And I think we just need more of it.
Thank you very much. We have some more questions coming. I would like to give to Pak Sambas very briefly, Pak, because of the time. So ask your question.
Okay. Assalamualaikum, Imam. Thank you very much for the time. We are running out of time. Yeah. Hi, Greg. Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, let me say that I don't know why, but maybe it's only my own opinion, but your face is glowing. It's like we are Muslim just taking wudu before salat. I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is compliment for myself. It's number one.
Thank you.
Now, this is to Nusantara Foundation. Really, I'm impatient and really eager to get your book immediately. And I think I heard you say something that you are preparing another book, right?
I am, yeah.
Right?
I am.
And
yeah.
see that I can agree with you that maybe you can make like another 10 book about Islam, about Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Piagam Medina or Medina
Charter.
Piagam Medina, yeah. I think, to my understanding, is the first nation state modern, the first testament, yeah, that everybody follows. Because that time Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is chosen leader, yeah, in Medina, because at that time Medina is full of people who are fighting each other, yeah, two big groups of Yahudi at that time, and they couldn't find a great leader to make them to set up a peace between them. And Nabi Muhammad, with his personality, with his experience and portfolio, and his being a chosen leader, the only one. So I think, what do you think? If you agree with this, I'm very happy. Number two is the last one. I don't know. For me, Islam is the only religion since Nabi Adam alayhi salam. I don't know if you agree or not, because Islam is, to me, is like how to surrender everything to the God, to the Almighty. Yeah, being representing of God in the earth. So since Nabi Adam, since Prophet of Adam until Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I think Islam is the only religion that I hope that one day you will reach and find the truth. I think that's all. Thank you, Pak Imam. Waiting for the book immediately.
Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, the second might have been the first point, but the idea of the nation state and Muhammad serving as the kind of objective mediator, I think that's pretty much close to a historical fact, in that he was really successfully working to overcome a generational long struggle. And this was a civic nation, and it was arguably a secular nation. And I think this is important because Westerners tend to monopolize these terms. You know, it's like Westerners are the first to find freedom of religion and freedom of speech and all of these kind of buzzwords. And it's just, it's not that clear cut, you know, like that's why the clash of civilizations is really, it's really defunct in a lot of ways, because those in the camp of Western civilization see those in the camp of Islamic civilization as being intolerant of religion. But we know in 622, it was not, you know, so this is where the civilizations come together. The third point, so my personal conviction here and my belief is, for some reason, I just can't say that Muhammad would be the last prophet. It's just a belief that I have. I think that God is alive. God works in mysterious ways, and I would not be able to say that God will not send another prophet. I just don't put a boundary on it. So that's just my personal belief. Hopefully no one's offended. And then, yes, I am writing another book. Actually, I might be announcing it within the next week on social media. I'm just waiting for the publisher. It's going to be published by Hearst in Oxford, and it's called People of the Book, Prophet Muhammad's Encounters with Christians. And it's a biography of his life told through a sociological prism of his life interactions with Christians. And this was a remarkable book to research. I learned a ton about the Christians in Muhammad's midst, the history of Christians on the Arabian Peninsula and elsewhere. And the book should be out in May of 2021, I hope, God willing.
Great. Now, when it comes to the issue of prophet, of course, each person has a definition of it. When you come to the prophets, in a sense, there's a teacher who comes from time to time to teach the people and to lead the people into the right way. We, in the Islamic tradition, we have what we call mujaddid. And that is the people who are coming to renew, the teaching. And yes. The prophet mentioned that. But again, it's about definition. We are coming to, there is an iPhone, but there is no name. So I'm not giving to this unless you rename your contact, not only iPhone, because I don't know. So Pak Ibrahim Siregar, please do ask your question.
Okay, thank you, Imam Ali. Thank you very much. Mr. Craig, I want to say that the more people expert at the socio-religious scientists like you, the more Westerners understand what Islam is. So, thank you very much for study of Islam so very good. You deeper in Islamic studies than us actually. There is a point that I got from your saying just now that people who is more religious becomes a very less inclusive, become exclusive like that. Actually, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has shown that he is very religious, but also very he's integrated with his society, and that is the thing, maybe the value that we have to get. That's why I want to ask you, what is the way, the best way to make a people like this actually for the Muslim? For in my view, yeah, your point that it is very good that to make a subject in the university's program, something like a subject to study Islam from the multidisciplinary approach. As Prophet Muhammad SAW understand the religions, he has the religious precept, but also the value of the anthropological value in his society. Maybe this is the thing that we have to be integrated, study Islam and also other religion, and also study the anthropological value. That way, maybe in that way, the people, many people will be very integrated, religious, pious, at the same time also inclusive, and humanity become very strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing that I wrote down here is really kind of a question, and I think it goes to the question of like, what does it mean to be religious in a 2020 context? I'll tell you personally what it means to be religious and like how I am religious in my life. It's the hope that I continue to have. It's the way I treat people on an everyday basis. It's what I do in private. And notice here, some of these things that I'm mentioning, it's not necessarily anything to do with big truth claims and doctrine. So I think it's important, you know, earlier I raised the question, like, what does it mean to be a Muslim? And I think the question, what does it mean to be religious? You know, if we're going to define this as, you know, everyday habits and like, you have to believe this and you have to do this and you cannot do that. You know, for me personally, that's limiting, and that's not how I understand religion. You know, religion is a connection to my creator, but because he created me and he created everything around me, I have to be connected to creation. That's what it means to be religious to me. So I think we need to reimagine, you know, some of these fundamental concepts that I don't think we think enough critically about. What does it mean to be Christian? What does it mean to be Muslim? What does it mean to be a believer? And then to the second point that you raised, you know, how do we kind of get Islamic knowledge and some of the stories that are covered in the book kind of integrated into the mainstream? And how can we get people more familiar? I think we actually need to talk less about the traditional conservative idea of religion. And again, this goes back to doctrine, it goes to dogma, it's truth claims. Let's start by sharing stories that are relatable. that people can relate to. And this is what I do in the book. You know, I use stories, Bilal ibn Rabah, the Constitution of Medina, the first Hijrah, the farewell sermon, just these single stories that anyone can understand. You don't even need to be a Muslim or a Christian to understand it. You know, you could be whatever and find value in it. And I think the simpler we make the knowledge at this point, perhaps the better, you know. And before we dive into the Quran, before we dive into the Christology, let's humanize who our historic faith leaders are. So instead of saying, you know, did Jesus say that he was the Son of God? Huge question. Why don't we focus on how Jesus treated people in our societies? I think it's much more constructive, and I think we need to rely on stories that transcend time, that are still relevant, even though they happened thousands of years ago. Thank you.
In other words, religiosity means hablum min Allah wa hablum min an-nas, and that is our commitment to God and our commitment to humanity, and both cannot be separated. But Dr. Rahman.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. Barakatuh. This is the chairman of Jamaica Muslim Center.
I
am part of it. Alhamdulillah.
Ibrahim.
Thank Dr. Craig Considine for your beautiful effort, basically, in this difficult time, and you are bringing the legacy of Prophet Muhammad, his character. I will just share one thing. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, he said that every prophet came to their people, you know, to invite to God. And I was sent to the whole humanity. So when he said his ummah, he mentioned that everyone this time and onward is my ummah. Means that everybody, you know, actually his ummah means this is the time. And we know that now we are in global village, so we understand better than time, like when other prophet came in a small area, you know, people has to go one place to other place, maybe months journey. So now we understand better than before. So when he said that I am for everyone, and I will, you know, I am here to teach you about God, his promise. And he lived his life according to that promise. Means whatever he preached, he followed it. So thank you very much for your kind effort to bring his life to in a simple way, as you mentioned, by small stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just real quickly, if you don't mind, Imam Ali, I'd just like to say two quick things. Practice what you preach, I think is a really, that's an important kind of element, I think, in anyone's moral compass. You know, be, you know, put some backing to your words. Don't just be a person of words. Be a person of action. And then Ibrahim, I actually, you know, I got to thinking, I don't think the Islamic tradition, the sources say, they don't name these, 240,319 prophets, I think the earlier professor had mentioned. But they don't mention them by name. And I'm starting to wonder, like, would Saint Patrick, who brought Christianity to Ireland centuries ago, would he fit into the ummah of monotheism? Interesting. I mean, these are questions that I think are actually really important, because it gets to the definition of what a ummah is and how flexible it could be in terms of, you know, who belongs and who does not. It's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last two person to ask question is Mas Koko, please.
Halo. Assalamualaikum Imam Ali.
Assalam.
Imam Shamsi.
Gimana, sudah sehat?
Alhamdulillah. Dr. Craig Considine, is really glad to meet you virtually actually. And I have to appreciate your book. And I also been reading a number of Islamic books, but it's not written by Islamic scholars like Michael Hart with the 100 most influential people in this world, and some other non-Muslim scholars, but writing about Islam or Muslims. I really appreciate that. And it's really interesting when a non-Muslim writing about Islam or Muslim. And I also have to agree with you that now we, Islam or Muslim, lack of a right representation of Islam or Muslim. That's why there are a number of misleading perception, misleading assumption, conception about Islam or Muslims. And I also would have to agree with you that why you have to dislike a food when you never taste it. Okay, yeah. I agree with you. That's why there was a period in my life that I also like to discuss with some other non-Muslim scholars from many kind of religions when I was in Australia. And actually, one simple question.
Yes.
One very simple question, because I joined this forum quite late. I like to know the reason why you're really interested in writing about Islam, about Prophet Muhammad, or about Muslim in general.
Thank you.
Then after that, I would also suggest to you that after this, maybe in your next books, you explore more about Quran, because there are, for example, like the creation of the universe. It is very clearly stated in Al-Quran, what's been also explained by Stephen Hawking in the Big Bang Theory. It's already stated clearly in the Quran 1400 years ago. And so many other scientifically proven research. Also one written by Professor Wagoner in about 1984, 87, something like that. Professor Wagoner is one of the researchers for Earth, okay, like researching about mountains, savanna, things like that. And one of the conclusions of Professor Wagoner is that all mountains in this world, they're all moving at least or in average about 5 centimeters every year. And then it's also already clearly stipulated in the Al-Quran that Allah or God said that don't you see that all the mountains are moving like clouds. So it's really proven, scientifically proven in every verses in Al-Quran, it's scientifically proven.
Yeah.
So maybe I would suggest for your next book, please explore more about the verse related to all sciences. Okay.
Sure.
Also like Jacques Cousteau. Well, I'm sure you know about Jacques Cousteau.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
That was not my question. My question was what really interests you, why you also.
Got it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Considine.
Thank you
very much, Imam Shamsi.
Sure.
Thank you. So yeah, quick point about the food thing. You know, I mentioned earlier, it's like hating Muslims that you don't know is like hating food that you've never tasted.
Yeah.
And I think the common theme there, and I'm guilty of this too, by the way, like I'll look at food and I'll be like, no way am I eating that. But what's unfortunate is people do the same thing to human beings. They look at human beings and they say, well, I don't like the way that looks. And then they dismiss them. So we all need to be better. Let me say too, before I get into the personal reason, you know, I in some ways am nothing new in terms of being a scholar who is part of a different faith tradition, or at least identifies as a quote non-Muslim. If you know, we've been talking about the technicalities of these terms, but you know, for the purpose of what I'm about to say, I'm not the first non-Muslim. Karen Armstrong, we've talked about her. Professor Juan Cole has written an amazing book about Prophet Muhammad's vision for the Ummah. We have Fred Donner, his book about what it meant to be a believer. And then Gary Wills, Professor Gary Wills was a revelation to me over the summer. I read 4 of his books. One of them is called What the Quran Meant.
Yeah.
And this is an exceptional book. I really encourage everyone to read it. He doesn't get into the science in the Quran, which is, my friend, our previous speaker, that might be outside of the boundaries of my work, but perhaps someday. What inspired me to write this book? Geez, big question. I think fundamentally, first and foremost, as a human being, Muhammad is someone that lived a life, a full life that I admire. And I admire his principles, the way he led his community, the way he overcame adversity, how relevant his life is to human beings today, not merely relevant to certain countries. I'm talking about everyone. Secondly, I'm inspired as a Christian, as someone that has been involved in Christian-Muslim relations for some time, as someone who lived through 9/11, as someone who lived through the blatant demonization of Muslims at around the world, being someone who has studied the scripture and who has come to understand Islam at a big picture. Theologically, it resonates with me. The love that the Quran shows to Jesus and to Mary, knowing that Muhammad called Jesus basically a brother from another mother. You know, these things I deeply appreciate as someone of faith. You know, when I see my traditions and my beliefs not only recognized but embraced, that's really important. And then finally, as a US citizen, you know, again, as someone who's living in, I think, what we would largely refer to as kind of Islamophobic times, again, I draw inspiration from the Constitution of Medina, it lining up quite well with my definition of what it means to be an American. You know, so I'm seeing similarities across civilizations. And I think ultimately the big story here is that Muhammad's teachings and God's vision for us all are still relevant today. And the book deals with that, you know, explicitly.
Great, wonderful. Mas Koko basically is a businessman in Indonesia. So if you talk about concierge services in hotels, and if you want to rent any means of transportation from jet to helicopter to cars, you know, he's the man.
Nice. That sounds good.
Okay, the last one, Pak Toha dari Washington DC. Dr. Toha.
Yeah.
Hey, Toha.
Yeah. Hey.
What's up? Nice to see you.
It has been like 1 year, right? You promised that you would like to come to DC. I'm waiting for your coming, right?
COVID
and we have in Indonesian community. We have a big, huge number of food Indonesian community. Then, if you come, I believe that you would like it someday. Okay? Promise.
I'd love to. I'd love to.
Okay. It's a short and sub, Professor Greg. I just read it's a book. It's like it was issued. It's published in 2017 from Douglas Murray. From Douglas Murray, right? The
Yes.
book is
Scottish guy.
The Europe, Immigration, Identity, and Islam, right? One thing that I would like to ask you, why in Europe now there are like 30% become atheists? Why?
Atheists,
Okay.
yeah.
atheist. Why? The strong reason I don't get from the book, but
Taha, you are mute. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, unmute and make it brief because.
Yeah. Okay, Ustad. One more. Okay, Prophet Muhammad is not only the king, but also Imam and the father, and also the warlord, the knight. My question is, how many people had been killed by our Prophet as the warrior in the front line? I don't get any information about this one. Thank you, Imam Shamsi. Thank you, Besar Greg. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
So yeah, I'll take the second question first. Indeed, Prophet Muhammad was a man of many hats. That's another reason why I admire him. Another really good book by Professor Montgomery, who was at University of Edinburgh. I think the book was called Prophet and Statesman. So yeah, recognizing that Muhammad was not merely a prophet who's dealing with theology, he was a diplomat, he was a lawgiver, he was a politician, and so on. As a warrior, I think most scholars would recognize that the battles that the Ummah had fought against the Quraysh and the allies of the Quraysh were not these massive battles of, World War II proportions. They were actually relatively small. And I don't know the precise number of people that died in every battle, but my understanding is that there was not a tremendous loss of life on either side. And the number that comes to my head, and don't quote me on this, is like 130 believers, I think, died, or something of that over the span of 624 to 630, over the span of 6 years. So not a lot of loss of life in battle. Now, outside of battle, when we deal with what happened with some of the Jewish tribes, I think we're nearing the end of the program, and that's a different ball game. But that's one that I can comment on, perhaps in the future. With atheism, why is atheism rising in Europe? And indeed in this country, because it is. The Pew Research Forum is showing via statistics that atheism is rising. And I think one of the reasons why it is because people aren't seeing religion as relevant anymore. We are, perhaps as adults, as leaders, we're not giving them the stories, some of which are documented in this book, to the youth, to encourage the youth to think of religion as offering solutions. Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, Abraham, so on and so forth, were individuals who are not just making these truth claims, making you believe this or that. These were people that were extraordinary. They were heroes. They were changers. They were revolutionaries. And as we've discussed over and over again in this session, a lot of the issues that Muhammad was dealing with are still relevant today. And we need to share these stories, That's why the anti-racism chapter, I think, would be intriguing to young people in this country, because they're living through this moment where racial equality is a huge thing. So, in addition to teaching the children the basics, how to pray, this is what we believe, you have to make it relevant. This is one reason, Toha, that I veered away from my faith for years in my life, because growing up, the teachers just never made it relevant. I didn't understand why I needed to memorize these things. Why did I have to do this? Who was Jesus really, outside of you telling me he was the Son of God? Tell me the stories. How can I apply his life to my life today? So I think this is one of the reasons why atheism is rising. People think of religion as like a superstition, or this dogmatic thing that condemns people to hellfire. What about living the life and the legacy of some of these people? There's inspiration there.
Yeah, exactly. So how to make and to show the religion's relevance and contribution to our real life. That's what we need. And that's very much going back to how we peoples of religion, particularly the scholars, should we present the religion. There are many things to talk about this book, and without, there's almost 2 hours in.
Yeah, great time.
Please do, Dr. Considine, can these people outside of the United States buy it from Amazon or something?
So the options that I've found, I've tried to create a list. I've pinned it to my Twitter page. And if you click on the link at the top of my Twitter page, it has all the countries that are selling it. I think there's one in Malaysia and Indonesia, but
okay.
Good luck, because a lot of people around the world are struggling to get it, unfortunately. So hopefully you can.
Please do. You can find that in Indonesia possibly, and also another book of Dr. Considine is this in Indonesian language. If you want to buy it, this one, Muhammad Nabi Cinta. Okay, you can buy this from Mizan, and also hopefully this is going to be translated soon into Indonesian language. So finally, Dr. Considine, thank you so very much on our behalf. And I just wish you a very good luck and keep safe in the midst of this Corona. Hopefully it'll pass soon so that we can travel to Indonesia. Many people want us to be there soon.
You would be the best guide, Imam Ali. I don't think I could ever step foot in Indonesia without you the first time. You have to be there with me. That would be an epic and very memorable trip.
I will do. Thank you so very much, Bapak dan Ibu. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you for those who are from outside the United States. See you soon, inshallah. You can unmute yourself. You want to say